that someone like Lando Norris will probably have a points clause in his contract for McLaren with the, saying, okay, this year we've got to get a certain number of points, otherwise I'm allowed to search for new employment. It's quite common, but also it's a bit like in football where, because one of the things I've seen, as we mentioned before the show, was that Leclerc might be signing a 6-year contract with Ferrari.
Yeah.
And you think that's a long, long time. But, don't you remember when Alan Pardew signed an 8-year contract with Newcastle?
Yeah.
So contracts in sport are always kind of like, it's more just an annoyance to get over. If you want someone or someone wants to go, there's not really much you can do to actually keep them there. If they're not happy about it. You've seen it with footballers when they, even though they got a contract, if they don't want to play, they just don't come to training. Yeah. Which is, we can't do that.
Nobody. Does that really happen in Formula 1?
No.
When's the last time someone really spit their dummy out? I can't really remember someone refusing to race or something.
Well, I think we remember the whole Oscar Piastri saga, which was
course,
going on last year, right?
Yeah, yo, people, welcome back to On Track GP, the podcast. Your host to do the most and never coast, Matisse in the building. And we're back. No F1 this weekend, but still plenty to talk about. Richard, how are we doing today?
Yeah, not bad, mate. I'm in a good mood. Arsenal winning the Community Shield over the weekend. It's a good start. Jurian Timber's become an absolute baller. So.
I was obviously, saving myself for that moment where I knew you'd bring it up. And I was like, it doesn't matter anyway. It's just a plate. It's just a dinner plate. It doesn't mean anything. It's fine.
You just wish you were able to win that dinner plate.
Not annoyed at all. Can't even be involved in it. But there's a lot of news to discuss today. A lot of rumours circling around. First of all, Max Verstappen looking to create a two-car GT3 racing team as a means to provide sim racers with a route into the competition, into competitive GT3 racing. Explain to me kind of like what is GT3 racing? What is that about?
So GT3 is it's a type of sports cars, and basically it is very, very highly racing modified versions of the road cars. Okay. So you've got, for example, your Ferrari 488. You've got your Porsches. I don't know which one it is now because there's so many Porsches. They all look the same. You've got your BMW M4s. You've got a lot. It's basically the high-end mark for the high-end manufacturers. But they're all based on the road car, and then they use something called balance of performance to make them all the same. Because obviously, for example, your BMW M4 is not going to be as fast on the road as your Ferrari 296s.
Yeah.
So what they then do is they've got different engines. They've got different shaped chassis and everything. They then use some algorithms and testing to actually make them so that they're very, very level. So all the cars are able to compete against each other. And it's a really exciting form of racing, and it races all over the world in everything. They're going to the World Endurance Championship, Le Mans 24 hours next year.
Okay.
And it's a very accessible way for I wouldn't say rookies, I'd call very experienced sim racers, because they do have some drive aids. You've got traction control, anti-lock brake system, so it's quite easy to get in and be relatively competitive. Obviously it's blooming hard to be at the front, but I think it's as an entry thing for some sim racers, it's a cool level of competition.
Is that like would a fair comparison be like grassroots?
No, not at all.
Early stage?
No, I mean it's honestly for GT racing, you have different types of sports car racing. You have the prototypes, which is what I've been showing in the onboard videos and what I try and specialize in. And then you've got the GT cars, which is the high-end road cars. And the manufacturers have very, very serious programs, and they have professional drivers in there contracted to the factory. You have many, many former Formula 1 drivers actually competing in GT3. Many of the drivers on the young driver programs are doing it as well. Alex Albon was in GT3 a couple of seasons ago before coming back to F1.
Yeah.
Liam Lawson was in it as well. You've got Robert Schwartzman, reserve driver for
some
Ferrari.
Really good drivers are in this.
It's seriously, seriously tough. Honestly, a lot of those guys would be, on paper are good enough for Formula 1. It's seriously high level.
Yeah.
But you have different categories within it. So you have a category for your full pros, and then they look at your experience based on your racing CV, and they give you a driver categorization. So platinum for your world-class drivers, gold for your up-and-coming, kind of on the plateau of being world-class.
Yeah.
Then your silver for your professional amateur trying to become a professional driver, and your bronze for your pure
rookie,
gentleman hobbyist.
Okay.
So you've then got different categories, and so you're able to compete against people with similar levels of experience and ability to you.
So I'm guessing this is kind of like a hint that Max Verstappen maybe when it's all said and done at the end of his career, is still going to maybe want to be involved in racing. Because you see some drivers, as soon as they're done racing, they're gone. They're like out the doors. Maybe Hamilton might be like that, but maybe Max is.
Yeah, and you said Max wants to do Le Mans one day. Well, this is the perfect way to get into it. And also the other thing is with GT racing, you don't have the aerodynamic effects or to the same level that you do with Formula One. So you don't get the dirty air, the turbulence effect. So the racing is and also because of the ABS and the traction control and the balance of performance, the racing is intense as hell.
Is it?
It is absolutely
entertainment levels.
It's insane.
Right up there.
I mean, Le Mans in GT a couple of years ago, I can't remember what year, it came down to the last lap. There were 3 cars battling for the win. It is, and after 24 hours of racing, it is insanely intense. And it's a lot of fun. All the drivers who I know who race it say it's some of the most fun racing they've ever done.
I'm trying to imagine what the pit stops look like for a car that I can see on the road.
It's racing cars always have different things. Like for example, with the Ferrari, if your mirror comes off, for example, you don't just replace the mirror in the pit stop. You just change the door. The door's just got a couple of little clips on it, and you just literally unclip the door, put a new one on. It takes about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could have that happen in your quick fit, it would make everyone's life a lot easier.
AA
right?
pull up, this doesn't seem to be quite so simple, but when you say it like that,
exactly.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's really interesting. I'm quite interested to see how that gets along for Max, because I'm interested to see his kind of character development outside of just the F1 car. I feel like there's still like a lot of potential and a lot of kind of like unseen sides of Max that we don't know yet. So this is kind of like a little maybe inkling to what he's interested in doing after. But Toto Wolff also in a cycling accident on holiday, and it doesn't seem to be the first time, fracturing an elbow, had also been seen in a paddock a few years ago with a cast and splinter after a previous incident. So yeah, I mean, that's a shame for Toto.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a shame. It's a shame for his blooming table, because it's bad enough when he slams his fist on that table when he's just got his skin. Now he's got a cast on it. So you think what's going to happen after that, man?
Do you know what? I think Toto, he's had some stressful couple of years. I'm not gonna lie. Ever since what happened at Abu Dhabi, it's just been downward spiral for Toto ever since then. Also, this is something that I did see over the weekend that I was absolutely gobsmacked. I couldn't wait to talk to you about, which was Carlos Sainz reportedly agreeing signing a non-binding contract with Audi to join Sauber in 2025. Now, that's crazy for me, because I'm looking at his time at Ferrari. I'm thinking, you've still got so much more to kind of prove and to show and to do, but where do you think this comes from for Sainz?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, he's still got a lot to show, and he hasn't really
fulfilled.
Exactly. I think that's the good way to put it. He's not really fulfilled what he's able to achieve at Ferrari, and that is not really anything against Carlos. That's the situation Ferrari have found themselves in. But there's a bit of history there, and remember, Sainz has driven for so many teams up and down that pit lane already, so he's worked with a lot of people. A key thing is Andreas Seidel, who was at McLaren. I think I'm 99% sure he was at McLaren when Carlos was there, or if not, it was just after. And so he would have had some conversations with Carlos. He's now become the team principal of the Audi team when it comes like that. I think from 2026 or whenever it was. Yeah. And knowing someone like that, plus also Andreas has a very, very good reputation. I know him from sports cars because he was the team principal of Porsche when they were in the World Endurance Championship before he went to McLaren.
Right.
And he's very, very highly respected. So I think if he knows him from that could be an interesting link. And then obviously you've got Frederick Vasseur, who used to be the team boss at Alfa Romeo, now obviously at Ferrari. So there's that link there where they could have had a few discussions. But I think that's a really interesting move. And the other thing is Audi have this unbelievable habit of every single type of racing they go into, they are unbelievably successful. And any level. At sports cars, they dominated for years. DTM, they dominated. Rally cars, they dominated. So everything Audi does, they take it very seriously. And the fact that Audi have cancelled their Formula E programs, their GT programs, purely to put all this effort into Formula One, I don't think that's actually that bad a move from Carlos. I think that Audi...
You think he could be potentially ahead of the curve, kind of like maybe when Alonso moved to Aston Martin.
Yeah, I think that Audi is really going to be a serious force to be reckoned with. And the other thing with Audi coming from a manufacturer is it's not just Audi. Audi is owned by Volkswagen Group. So this is effectively going to be the de facto factory team for Volkswagen Group, which includes all the brands like Bugatti, Lamborghini, obviously Volkswagen itself. So there's some unbelievable resources there. So I actually think, it's surprising, but I don't think that would be a bad move for someone like Sainz.
Do you think he would kind of go in? Obviously, we don't know who the second driver will be, but will he be, if he's maybe signing a pre-contract, do you think he's going in as a kind of like a lead driver for them, or do you think they could go and bring in another massive name as well and just have them fight it out? Obviously, it's too early maybe to tell, but
yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting one because the one thing with Carlos is, as I said, because he's driven with so many teams, he's seen so many different philosophies and how so many different teams work. From that side of it, he's actually very, very valuable rather than someone like, say, Charles Leclerc, who's only been at Alfa Romeo, which is going to become Audi.
Yeah.
And Ferrari. Carlos has got a lot more visibility on how different philosophies and structures work. The other thing is Audi have some very, very serious drivers on their books and have done for a couple of years. So it wouldn't surprise me to see potentially them bringing in a rookie from their books into Formula One if they do go for someone as experienced as Sainz. I mean, that remains to be seen because there's been a big exodus of Audi drivers since they pulled out. They're going to let go of 14 of their professional drivers at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But I think you'll see Carlos become a de facto team leader in that situation.
Yeah, that's going to be so interesting to see because I can't imagine Carlos is signing this without really, like you said, knowing that this is going to be a strong team. You don't want to leave Ferrari and the next thing you know, Audi are, messing around in the middle of the field. But if they've got all this backing behind them, all this money behind them as well, there must be some big expectations coming from them to maybe, I don't know, is it possible for an F1 team in their first season to even think of a title fight, or is that's just too much to ask without so much maybe information and data?
It's too much to ask, especially since the FIA brought in the copycat regulation, which basically meant that if you remember Racing Point effectively copying Mercedes a couple of years ago and being in the COVID era, and then obviously we had the same with Haas when they first came in, it was basically a Ferrari. I think with the regulations like that now it will be hard, but I mean, having been around Audi for most of my professional career because of the sports car thing, I've seen that the level that they operate and how they go into things, and they will be a force to be reckoned with.
I'm looking forward to it, and we're going to speak about copycats in a minute. But also in the news, Red Bull are rumoured to already be focusing on 2024 car coming into the second half of the season, while Mercedes are rumoured to be bringing in more upgrades to their current car, the W14. Do you think Mercedes should be following in Red Bull's kind of footsteps in focusing on next year's car, or do you still think there's something to salvage from this season? Obviously, we know that the two titles are basically done. So what kind of benefits do you have from continuing to bring upgrades to this season, do you think?
Well, I think for Mercedes, there'll be a lot of benefit for them because they're in a serious fight for those constructors' championship points in those positions. As you say, the P1 for the Drivers' Championship and for the Constructors is pretty much a done deal. So for Red Bull, it would make sense if they started to shift their focus because they're in a league of their own at the minute. But for Mercedes, there's a very real chance that they could finish second, but there's a very real chance that they could finish fourth as well. And just to put that into perspective, I don't know the exact numbers because it changes every year, but that's probably a difference of about $10 to $15 million in prize money, which is a serious amount of money. So I would, for Mercedes, there's definitely gains to be had by continuing to develop this year's cars. But Red Bull, it makes no sense, to be honest.
Yeah, I think with Red Bull as well, we're kind of hoping that they maybe don't focus on next year's car. When they put their focus to a car, it's a serious problem. I'm kind of like thinking to myself, maybe you could just keep this year's version if you don't mind and just keep it at that. But speaking of this year's version, AlphaTauri, there's rumours suggesting that they are to become Hugo Boss Bulls Racing, which is quite a cool name.
That's a cool name.
I like that name, Hugo.
And Hugo Boss in Formula One, that would just be quite stylish.
Yeah, you'd assume so. Everybody in that team would have to dress up in suits and whatnot. Due to an ongoing discussion with Hugo Boss, the team are also rumoured to be using the RB19, which is the current car in 2024. Now, is that allowed? Because we just spoke about copying and mimicking cars. That is effectively what this is taking this year's car. And if they do take this year's car, obviously we know other teams are going to upgrade, look to improve. But that is a strong car to take to next season. Minimum, you'd want to be probably aiming for about a podium position.
Yeah, exactly. and honestly, with the regulations staying fairly stagnant next year, it really won't make that big a difference. So this year's Red Bull will still be very, very competitive next year, no question, because of the level it's at. It's a different one with Red Bull and AlphaTauri / Hugo Boss or whatever that's going to end up becoming, because Red Bull actually is the funding thing behind AlphaTauri. So I don't know how the licensing works. I don't know how the naming of the licensing works, and that's something that only the FIA will know. But there might be a loophole there whereby they can get away with giving it to Red Bull, to AlphaTauri, purely because they own the team and they fund the team. Yeah. So then you could argue that it's actually it's coming from their own source and everything, and it's not a copycat thing. You know, the copycat thing would be literally where someone just takes a lot of pictures and does a direct copy of it.
Yeah.
So there could be some loopholes.
Four cars on the grid then, if you're Christian Horner.
Yeah.
Basically.
Exactly, and we've seen that with Red Bull, and they use AlphaTauri how they want, and they have done in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but if they do take that Red Bull next year, they will be seriously competitive, no question at all.
Did Mercedes have kind of like a similar relationship with Williams at the point where Williams were really doing very well with Massa and Bottas? Obviously, we know they have the same kind of engine provider, but they were so quick, Williams. It felt like they were almost the second Mercedes at that point.
I mean, and that's the thing. They were the powertrain provider, but also they provided the gearbox as well. And the gearbox, everyone just thinks of the gearbox like they do in their road car. Like, oh, I change gear. There's a lot of things where the gearbox makes a huge difference. You know, suspension mounting points, chassis mounting points, and that you can actually make some huge differences through that. So there was a period when Williams were very strong, and I'm sure Mercedes were aware of that. But it's a bit different for Red Bull and AlphaTauri, because Red Bull, will always have the power to be able to do what they want with that team.
Yeah, 100%. And in next season, it'd be interesting to see Ricciardo, you've got Tsunoda, you've got Liam Lawson, who is in those seats as well, and obviously what happens in the senior team. But if they win drivers and constructors, as we've been kind of saying over the last week, even though Perez is under pressure, his contract isn't actually running out. So unless they're going to pay would they have to pay him to kind of pay him off to take him out of that contract?
Yeah, I mean, it's different. But also the other thing is with Perez is as I said, he's still, Helmut Marko made a good point. He's still running second in the championship.
Exactly, yeah.
He seems to get on okay with Max at the minute. And
Which is a big thing.
Yeah, and so he's doing everything.
And he's marketable, like you've said as well.
Yeah, I think I saw some crazy stat the other day, like Red Bull's most powerful market at the minute is Central America, and Central and South America. And you wonder why that is, right? So I don't see any reason to change at the minute. But there is, it seems like with the influx of drivers who want to come into Formula One next year, it does seem like we're going to have a situation where there's not enough seats on the grid. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking as well, because there are you've spoken about some really good talented drivers that are coming through, and it's like, I'm looking at the grid now, and it's quite strong. I'm not seeing too many weak points, as I've seen in previous years, where I'm like, yep, he's gone. He's here because of money from his dad. You know what I mean? I'm not seeing as much of that anymore.
Yeah.
So it is a difficult one. De Vries being linked with several Formula E teams as well as a potential return to the endurance racing in light of his departure from F1 as well. What can we kind of expect from De Vries now? Obviously, I don't know if he would be looking to take a break maybe at this current moment after just coming out of F1. Like, what's the headspace actually?
I know what Nick's like. I'd be absolutely gobsmacked if he decided to take a break. He'll want to be back in something as soon as possible.
Yeah.
As I've said before, Nick's street cred in every single series around the world, no matter what, because everyone in motorsport kind of knows Formula One is its own kettle of fish, and it really, that what happens in Formula One kind of happens stays in Formula One, and people realise it's a very different ball game.
It's like when you go off, I don't know, like to a Vegas, and it's like whatever happens out there, don't worry, when you come home, everything's okay.
It makes, unless you do something so consistently bad, like for example, you have some drivers like Pastor Maldonado, obviously we called him Crashed Maldonado because he kept crashing in F1. Yeah. Well, when he came to sports cars, he still kind of had that reputation, and he had a few costly shunts, and that's that side of it. But in terms of performance, everyone knows how good Nick was in Formula E and sports cars. So, and also IndyCar when he tested in that, I think it was at the end of last year. Or the end of the year before, sorry. So he'll be in something next year, and he'll be in something competitive, and he'll win in whatever he's in, 100%.
How difficult is it to go from the mindset of because obviously Formula One is the pinnacle of the sport, but like you said, there's so many other great categories where, listen, as if you're a racing driver, you're going to have just as much motivation to go into those categories and do well. It's the same basics as go-karting, which is I want to race against people and I want to win. But how difficult is it to go from that mindset to Formula One to then go into different categories in terms of just the different cars and the different ways of driving and the different skill sets, tracks, and how difficult is it to quickly shift, I guess, your
Formula
mindset?
One is seen as the pinnacle of the sport because of the prestige of it and, what it is.
The eyes on it as well.
Yeah, it's like the Premier League is seen as the pinnacle of football, but that doesn't mean that the players who are playing in the top clubs in France or the Serie A, La Liga or the Bundesliga or anything, that doesn't mean that they're not world-class, top-quality footballers. And the clubs aren't world-class, top-quality clubs. It's just the way it goes. And if you don't make it and then you end up making a very good career, there's plenty of drivers who looked at it and they had the chance to go to Formula One, where everyone knows it's like swimming in a piranha pond. And you have to basically, you have one shot effectively, or you can go to other teams and consistently make a good living and have a very, very good life. So in terms of that side of it, it's not that different because, every time you get in a racing car, your job is to get in and do the best job you can with it. And some cars will suit you and some cars won't suit you. So he'll be able to adapt quite easily. And also he's already competed in sports cars, Formula E and everything, and he had no problems at all. So
he literally just come from Formula E, isn't it?
Exactly. So, Formula E is a bit different because obviously the racing's so particular and the cars are, they're not really proper okay, they're racing cars because anything that you race is a racing car, but it's not got, for example, it's got all-weather tires. It's not slick tires. Obviously, there's no engine. There's no gearbox like a regular car. I mean, they have gearboxes, but they don't have like a regular 6-7-speed gearbox like we have. So it is a different mentality, but he'll do a couple of tests and he'll be straight fine.
What is it like to drive in Formula E? Is it a stepping stone kind of?
No, I mean it's again, the whole aim for any racing driver is, of course, a lot of drivers want to do different things. I never, for example, when I was young, I never really cared about Formula One. I always wanted to be a sports car driver because I thought Le Mans cars were cool as hell. And still do. And Formula E is the sort of thing I find very, very difficult to get excited about because I like noisy V8s and, noise is half of my passion with motorsport, and Formula E cars sound like a remote control car.
Oh, really?
So, and the drivers, I'm not going to say some of the terms that they've described them to me, but the drivers don't enjoy driving them so much. But it's they're making money driving racing cars, so they're fulfilling what their career ambition was. Of course, for most drivers when they start, the ambition is to become Formula One world champion, and then the next best thing is to make a career as a racing driver.
100%. Just like in any sport, really.
Exactly.
Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris as well were at the MotoGP in Silverstone. You was there, wasn't you?
No,
you wasn't there.
No,
that is shocking.
I know. It's actually really bad.
What?
No. I was in. I had to do 2 days in Istanbul last week, and it was I arrived at like 2:45 on the day I arrived, and then got home at 2:45. 2 days later, so I was like, "No, I'm having a weekend off, man."
Would you ever see? You would never see bikers going into really cars and.
Well, I mean, like when Valentino Rossi tested for Ferrari a few times in Formula One, and Valentino Rossi's actually now racing in GT3. And he's actually starting to get a lot better. Now he's putting in the miles.
It feels like somebody going from UFC to boxing.
Yeah, it's very different. It's completely you can't match the two. And it's those. But honestly, MotoGP riders are completely mental. I have so much respect for those guys.
I remember when we was at Silverstone, you was telling me about them, and just the speeds that they go at round the corners at the angles is just stupid.
Yeah, well, I mean,
basically your head is nearly touching the ground.
Their head's nearly on the ground. They're using their elbows to support themselves, and their knees are rubbing on it. But not just that. I mean, acceleration-wise, they are way faster than Formula One cars. Way, way faster. I mean, they are.
And the accidents are just way more dangerous. And no protection.
These guys are crazy. I remember, like, I cut the tendons in my hand when I was in an accident at home when I was 12, 13. And because I wanted to get back ready for the karting season as quick as I can, I went and did some oxygen therapy, which basically increases the healing process because it does some oxygen treatment. You go in a hyperbaric chamber, they put you down to the equivalent of 30 meters below sea level, and then they put some lasers to activate blood cells, and it sped up my recovery process by I was supposed to be out for 6 months. I was out for 2 months.
That is some expensive recovery, though, isn't it? Like,
It
that
worked,
ain't
though,
part of
man.
NHS healthcare. Do you know what
No,
I'm saying?
I'm
You're gonna have to
afraid
pay
not.
for that.
But and the guy had asked for a signed picture from every driver that or athlete that he's had there.
Yeah.
And like 90% motorcyclists. And he says his biggest clients by far is motorcyclists.
Yeah.
Casually coming in, broken arms, broken legs, and literally like they break their bones during the weekend and they'll still race.
What?
Yeah, like I think Marc Marquez broke 5.
They did not have a reserve driver that can come in.
No, they literally, it's just completely bonkers. And it's like, for example, when it rains as well, they don't change tires. They just have a wet bike and a dry bike. So they pit, they jump off one bike and get on the other bike. It's bonkers.
A wet bike and a dry bike.
Yeah.
That's all they have.
Just literally straight hop off on one and back on the other and off they go.
Wow.
But mad respect for them.
Yeah.
There is, honestly, it's another ball game that.
And in terms of the tracks on MotoGP, what kind of tracks is there like a different way of kind of, because obviously we've got like Spa, we've got some quite creative and original tracks in F1. Would you be able to do the same kind of tracks in MotoGP, or is there a different way of structuring the kind of track for them?
They use a lot of the Formula One circuits. Obviously Silverstone this weekend. Spa actually has a famous bike race. But the problem is with MotoGP is whilst we prefer tarmac runoffs for racing cars to slow us down because it's the best way to get friction, motorcyclists hate them because obviously when they fall off their bike and they're sliding on their leathers, it doesn't slow them down that much, and they obviously get the tarmac effect of carpet burn, and which can go through their leathers. They actually prefer gravel because what happens is their bodies dig into the gravel, and then they start tumbling at God knows what speed, but it actually slows them down before they inevitably hurl into the fence. I mean, it's just bonkers.
MotoGP is one of those ones where I'm just looking at them. Actually, I'm genuinely scared watching the racing because it is like on edge constantly.
And it was great.
Any little touch, it's not like Formula One. Like any little touch is catastrophic. It's not just we'll just clip wheels going side by side and maybe a little bit of a front wing comes off. If you touch, it's that's it really.
It's mad. And again, Silverstone this weekend, then MotoGP, they put on a really, really good event. I wasn't there this year, but I've been in the past. But they had concerts every night, and there was 106,000 people over the weekend.
Wow.
So it's getting seriously popular. So honestly, I can say to anyone who hasn't seen MotoGP, it's well worth seeing. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, and obviously Lando and Oscar were there. Well, I hope they're not thinking of leaving us and going over to. I am
willing to bet there will be about 3 pages in their contracts which will explain the reasons why they can't go to MotoGP. That's for sure.
It's a madness. Talk to me about contracts as well, because we were speaking just before we started recording about breaks in contracts. Because whenever I look at Formula One drivers, if I see the contract's long, I automatically assume that they're not going anywhere anytime soon. But you were saying there are breaks in contracts and clauses that can kind of give you an allowance to go and move teams potentially depending on performance, or
there's significant performance clauses in there. So from both the team side and the driver's side. So for example, if the driver's not within a certain performance range of his teammate, there can often be break clauses in there or salary reductions.
They were speaking about potentially a salary reduction for Perez. I don't know if that was a real report, but that was.
I've seen that going around. Whether it's true or not, I mean, these are the details of the contracts, but they're not unheard of. Then for the teams as well, you can be sure that someone like Lando Norris will probably have a points clause in his contract for McLaren with the, saying, okay, this year we've got to get a certain number of points, otherwise I'm allowed to search for new employment. It's quite common, but also it's a bit like in football where, because one of the things I've seen, as we mentioned before the show, was that Leclerc might be signing a 6-year contract with Ferrari.
Yeah.
And you think that's a long, long time. But, don't you remember when Alan Pardew signed an 8-year contract with Newcastle?
Yeah.
So contracts in sport are always kind of like, it's more just an annoyance to get over. If you want someone or someone wants to go, there's not really much you can do to actually keep them there if they're not happy about it. You've seen it with footballers when they, even though they got a contract, if they don't want to play, they just don't come to training. Yeah. Which, we can't do that.
Nobody. Does that really happen in Formula One?
No.
When was the last time someone really spit their dummy out? I can't really remember someone refusing to race or something.
I think we remember the whole Oscar Piastri saga, which was going on last year, right?
Do you know what? I continue to keep blaming Alpine for that whole saga because they tried to tie up Alonso on a new contract and they completely forgot that they had Oscar in their wings, and it was like, if you weren't going to bring Oscar into the team, then Oscar was obviously going to be looking for a new team to join in the grid.
And he was testing a lot with Alpine last year. I was racing in Monza at the European Le Mans Series last year. And on the Wednesday before the event, Oscar was testing all day on his own with the previous year's Alpine. So they were doing a lot of mileage trying to get Oscar ready. It just, whatever happened, didn't make any sense.
They had Ocon there, they had Alonso there. They wanted to keep Alonso. Ocon wasn't going anywhere. Did they think they could put 3 drivers out on the grid?
Yeah, it was just weird. And, you know, Formula One, honestly, is a very dog-eat-dog world. You have to always be on your toes.
I could tell from that part of the Netflix series. It is ruthless. People are gossiping, having conversations, going in between little it's just,
and there's so much
stressful.
going on that we don't know about. Honestly, we only know 5% of what's going on in that paddock.
Must be so stressful as well when you're coming up to that point where you're not sure what your 2 drivers will be as a team principal, and then you've got rumours circulating about other team principals potentially talking to your drivers. What are like the rules on that? Because are you allowed to kind of speak?
It's not like football. You can talk whenever you want.
You can talk whenever no problem with people in contracts. It doesn't matter.
And even so, then if you want, you just go for a coffee with someone.
Just go for a coffee.
You know,
we're just catching up on old times.
Yeah, exactly. And it's constantly moving and constantly swimming as well. You have to be unbelievably ruthless and unbelievably thick-skinned.
Yeah.
And it's brutal, really, really brutal. And it's something that I really don't like because, don't get me wrong, it's a performance sport and everything, and we will, as an athlete, and you know, everybody in that game will do everything they can to possibly win.
Yeah.
But there's some horrendous people, well, not people, but there's some horrendous things that good people end up doing in Formula One. And stories I've heard over the years, which I probably can't repeat on here, but it's really not cool.
Really?
It's really not cool. Makes you really, really question the sport sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, it's not nice, man.
Does it just come from the pressure of performance and the money and...
Yeah, it's like anything. Whenever pressure and money gets involved, then certain things happen.
Yeah.
And it's always like that. And the problem is, it's very different to football, whereas in football, the players kind of have more power than the teams.
Yeah.
Whereas in Formula, you know, because there's so many teams out there who want certain players.
Yeah.
Formula One, it's very, very different because until you get yourself into a position of, say, Lewis or Fernando or someone like that, who's very, very secure,
top driver in the field,
where
you can go wherever you want.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're in that position, which takes quite a long time to get in there.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays, where you don't have you don't have any testing. I mean, remember, Lewis had about 7,000 kilometers of testing before he came into Formula One. You know, the problem is, you know that there's about 6,000 people who want your job.
Yeah.
And there's only 20 seats, and there's all sorts of politics and everything that gets involved. It's not based on pure performance.
Of course, we've seen that before with
exactly.
You know, ownership and son, I want you in this seat, and you know,
exactly.
100%.
And then you get there, and it's you know, that's where the challenge kind of begins. Honestly, getting there is not really the hard part. Staying there is the hard part.
Staying there is the hard part.
Yeah, because again, it's not purely performance related.
Yeah.
And you know, you look at Nico Hülkenberg, the guy.
You're constantly networking.
Yeah. Nico Hülkenberg, I think it was his rookie season. He qualified on pole in Brazil when Williams was underperforming, and he looked great, and everyone was saying how good he was and all that. And then all of a sudden, Pastor Maldonado comes along with Venezuelan state oil sponsorship.
And also, it is about your marketability as well, isn't it? And if the team feel like as if they have a driver that could help them get a certain sponsorship, then they're potentially going to take your spot.
And there used to be very different because when there literally used to be no testing ban. So it wasn't like a certain mileage restriction. It was just unlimited. So all the teams had separate test teams, and they'd be testing like 5 days a week.
Yeah.
So then having a role as a third driver actually wasn't bad because you were probably driving, I don't know, 150, 200 days a year. You were non-stop on track. It was ridiculous. And, you know, so then when and all the timings would be available. So you could still prove yourself even in testing, even if it's not in the public eye.
And go up against the
current race team. Race drivers. So people would see your performance, and there's a lot of drivers who came into very good seats because of how they did as a test driver.
Yeah.
But now, because there's no testing allowed, except for a couple of in-season tests where there's so much stuff that they need to try, it's very, very hard to actually prove yourself if you get knocked off that perch and then deal with all the other BS and politics. Honestly, it's really, you've got to be incredibly thick-skinned for it.
Yeah, it just gives credit to the guys that are at the top of the kind of the game where they can't be messed around. They're undisputed legends. And it's come from obviously proving yourself, winning races constantly, but there's guys probably behind them that are capable of doing that.
Yeah.
But they're never going to get the
I tell
opportunity
you,
because of the politics.
Yeah, I tell you, if I was in Formula One,
You'd be stressed.
Yeah, you'd be very stressed. The management team you'd have around you, you'd have a proper sports management company. I then have the best lawyer that I could afford.
I was about to say that. Yeah.
the best.
You're gonna have to sue somebody.
The best banker I could afford, and probably Brock Lesnar, just in case things got really out of hand. You know,
it's very much necessary, just in case anything goes left. But listen, it's been a great show. It's really good to talk about the contracts and kind of like what happens behind the scenes in the politics, because it's very easy to just see the race and think, okay, that's it. But even the mental state going into the race is probably, you know, compromised, or the factors because of all these things happening off the track as well. So to be able to kind of, I don't know, when you sit in that seat, kind of just let go of all of that stuff. If you've had an argument with team principal, there's politics, or you know what's coming in later on down the line in the season, because you can see what's happening around you, but just to focus and still drive that car and put the performance in is pretty impressive. I remember there were drivers that were, I can't think of any examples currently, but there were drivers that were in teams and they almost knew their fate at the end of the season. And it's like, you don't even like the team or the people around you anymore, but you're still trying to put the performance in because you're trying to get a new seat. So it's just,
exactly, you're going against, you're trying to prove yourself with people who don't believe in you, and they've like resigned themselves to not believing in you, so there's going to be no way you can change their mind. And don't get me wrong, it's different with the direct members of the team. The mechanics and the engineers, they will always try and work at the 110% for you. That's very, very different. But you know, when the greater picture is not behind you, that is what starts to have a serious effect.
Yeah. Well, Rich, it's been an absolute pleasure. What a show.
Oh, yeah, I loved it, mate.
Brilliant, honestly. And hope you guys have enjoyed at home. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like. And listen, I will see you guys next time on Track GP. Looking forward to the content that's coming up. We are still dying to go go-karting. We keep talking about it. Every time we meet up, we're like, we have to go go-karting. Hopefully it will happen soon. And obviously we want to see the racing coming back as well. I don't like summer breaks whatsoever. I want to see the racing, but let's see.
But we've got some cool content coming up in the next few weeks. Some really cool stuff's going to come out. So we'll keep you entertained.
We're going to keep you entertained. Maybe we'll have our own racing, do you know what I'm saying? Our own Grand Prix, on-track Grand Prix. Until next time, see you guys in a bit, people. Peace.